Sydney Institute of Marine Science during Meet the Ocean's Australian Education Tour. After a series of presentations, audience members were invited to play with our interactive technology, virtual reality penguins, and share their ocean story by speaking into our microphones.
All right, so instead of a traditional Q&A, we want you to experience with us, to play. So we're gonna set up Sky's Antarctic Chromatic Paradox on this screen so you can get a sense for how that all goes. Eric is outside with 5 virtual reality headsets that are ready to go. In case you wanna go to Antarctica, make sure to turn around. There's probably gonna be a penguin behind you. We also have temporary plankton tattoos. There are stickers, there are cards, and if you are interested in participating in our podcast, that microphone back there is live, and it's asking you, when did you first meet the ocean?
Okay, so I first met the ocean when I went to Hawaii quite a while ago, but I went snorkeling at Molokini Crater. It was totally insane. I didn't even realize that there was so much underneath the surface of the water that I hadn't seen before. It was really fun.
Growing up in Sydney, the ocean has always been a really big part of my life, but probably my first experience with ocean life was when I went to the Great Barrier Reef. It's one of my earliest memories of snorkeling, and being able to experience that was really special at such a young age, and it's really impacted my view on the ocean to this day.
Okay, so this year I decided to take elective geography, which has been really fun and I've really loved doing it. And last term we studied oceanography, which included things like politics of the ocean, animals under the ocean, conservation studies, that sort of thing. And it just really opened my eyes to the diverse world that the ocean is and how much you can learn and everything that the ocean represents. It's such an amazing place. That's when I met the ocean.
Welcome to another episode of Meet the Ocean. Today is a different one, a special one, because we are in Sydney, Australia. And we are not just in Sydney, Australia, but we have been here for the last 3 weeks on a Meet the Ocean education tour. We have visited the cities of Brisbane and Sydney, and those visits have included both schools and children's hospitals. What this effort is to bring the ocean to the young minds of Australia. And in doing so, we want to example a variety of things which we are going to talk about. We're going to talk about the tour, but to talk about the tour, we have to introduce the people who have given their time, their talent, and their effort to the tour. So I would like to introduce you to, or I should say, I would like Jimmy. Why don't you just introduce yourself, Jimmy?
Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Jimmy White, and I am the International Outreach Coordinator for Meet the Ocean.
And before we even get into that, Eric, lay it on me.
Hey, I'm Eric Wehrmeister, and I am the Media Director for Meet the Ocean.
And the fourth member of our contingency is currently on an airplane to Berlin. Her name is Sky Moray, and she is magnificent in all the ways, but specifically she is an information designer and a scientist, one who has sailed for thousands of kilometers around our planet. And that is the 4 people who have been touring across Australia, visiting the schools and hospitals. Oh, don't worry, we are not going to let anyone get away with such a simple introduction. Every one of the people on this education tour was magnificent. I met them all while working on the water, some up to 7 years ago. Sailors, scientists, videographers, and all individuals who care deeply about our planet. So I'm going to bring it back to the first time that I had Dr. Jimmy White on the microphone, just to give you a chance to get to know him a little bit better.
Hi everybody. I wear a few hats. So I was a undergraduate at James Cook University in Townsville, and I went to Tasmania, and I was among the first people in the world to work out a way to age octopus, which was pretty cool, which was my honours project with University of Tasmania, Tasmania Aquaculture and Fisheries Institute. And then from there I went back to Townsville and I was a fisheries observer for the shark fishery, which happens on the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area, which is something we can maybe get into a bit later. And then I did my PhD at JCU, looking at the effectiveness of marine parks to conserve shark species. And then after that, I started doing some whale research, and I did my postdoc again at JCU, but with a partnership between the Alaskan Sea Life Centre, the Whale Institute from WA, and also James Cook University. So it's been a wild ride, all the way from really, really smart octopus all the way through to 6-7 ton dwarf minke whales.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty fair spread.
It's pretty, yeah. It's a good range. But it's interesting because it's the days where you used to be a shark biologist or you used to be a fish biologist don't exist. It's like the academic pathway. Tenure jobs don't exist anymore. So what becomes more important is your skill set becomes answering questions, and then you apply that in a team or by yourself to an octopus or a shark or a fish or into an environment or to a system, and the skill is solving the problem.
The skill is to solve the problem. That is one idea of many that we are passing along on this education tour. But I have to admit, a lot of people actually said, what is an education tour? So let's start off by answering that question. Jimmy, what does an education tour do?
That's a great question. The education tour, we sort of hatched the idea about 12 months ago to walk the walk and to bring people to the ocean, to re-engage them with the wild places and to see where they'd met the ocean previously. And from those early conversations, it's morphed into something that's been much, much more. And so we're looking to do two things specifically. The first one was to engage school children across Brisbane and Sydney, and not just with content, but specifically about how they're seeing the content that they're already receiving. You know, how they're critically thinking about the environment, how they're connected to their political processes and what they see in their education system. And the second part of the tour was engaging with critically ill kids who are in the children's hospitals in Brisbane and Sydney, and then sharing some of the things that we've experienced and we're so fortunate to experience on the National Geographic vessels that we work on, and bring that to them using virtual reality. So they can put a headset on, and in a second they can be 12,000 kilometres away with us, with penguins. They can see us on the ship doing our thing, but they can also see the marine environment. And so that's kind of the idea, and I think what we ended up with exceeded all of our expectations.
Oh, I fully agree with that. Though I think we need to take a moment and talk about what virtual reality is. And Eric, I'm going to give this one to you. It's both a tactical and philosophical question, but what is virtual reality?
So, virtual reality, we have these headsets that we've been traveling around with, and basically they're displaying 360-degree video. And we have been showing a series of 1-minute clips to children in schools as well as the hospitals and some adults. And basically it just puts you into the environment visually and auditory, although you can't quite smell it. And fortunately, you can't smell it because the places where we've placed these cameras are in penguin colonies. So it's a whole lot of visual and auditory information. So we like to forego the olfactory information.
You know, when the technology gets there, we'll provide the full experience.
Look, I still think we just bring some penguin guano and stick it under the goggles, and then you have the whole thing.
It may change their perspective on the cuteness of penguins. So, you, Eric, can you describe your process? How, from the likely hours of footage that we gave to you from Antarctica, what made you pick this and that to example to the kids?
So what I was looking for is just moments within, say, an hour of recording. I'd select 1 minute where penguins or whatever is in the frame gets, fairly close and comes by. And I'm looking for little moments that will engage people or make them look right or left over their shoulder. And so we took about a minute clip from 7 different scenes down on the Antarctic Peninsula in South Georgia and put them together in an interface that's fairly easy to use. And so, yeah, it was pretty magical to see people totally transported.
What I found incredible was the way these kids would either try to run towards the penguins, which is a bit tricky because they can't actually see where they're going.
They were also throwing punches.
They were swinging their arms. They were reaching out, trying to grab hold of the penguins. And, whatever the result of their action is, it's the reaction that I think we were going for. Because specifically with the kids, in a situation where they are impaired in some way with their health and have to stay in the hospital, we are bringing Antarctica to them. And I think that experience has a lot of value. So how did you enjoy the virtual reality penguins, Jimmy?
I think that we are incredibly fortunate for the things we see. And it's hard for us to think about a normal day that we see down in Antarctica, where there's, it's not a killer whale hunting, it's not, glaciers carving, but it's just being in a penguin colony and being still and looking around you. And we take that for granted very often. And just giving these people a couple of seconds to go to that place and see it, and something that's completely out of their spectrum of experience, and seeing them transformed and go into that place, and it's just sheer wonder. And it really, it makes you mindful of just how lucky we are to be able to do what we do. And also, I think it reinforced the reason we decided to do this in the first place. In the last year of, hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of data and hundreds of hours of Eric's time to pull it all together, and flying across the planet from Berlin and from West Coast and Antarctica, and getting us all here and doing it. I think all of that travel and time and practice really evaporated for all of us when we saw in the hospital, and you have the young person who's, is going through a really hard time, and the family's going through a really hard time, and they're looking for anything in their life that can get them away, even if it's for 30 seconds, from the hospital walls and the treatment and the prognosis.
Yeah, it was really special to see the reactions. I didn't quite, for me, I guess I've seen it quite a lot, and it doesn't really evoke that same sort of response, but seeing people who have, never seen a penguin, never been in these environments, they put it on, and like you said, Jimmy, it's a whole body smile. Like you said, you saw their smile going up into the VR goggles.
We had this young girl, and she was really sick, and she came in with some assistance to the class, and she really wanted to be in the class because, normally she wasn't able to go to school just with the treatment she was under. She came and she had nasal cannula, and she had an IV and an EKG in one of the tabs still on her. So it was pretty confronting to see. And the headsets, when you first put them on, they feel like they're a medical device. They really do feel like that kind of claustrophobic thing that you get in a CT scan or an MRI. And she was quite apprehensive at the start, but she was so committed to seeing it that she kind of, got through that initial apprehension of putting the goggles on. And when you first put them on, you see a still image of whatever we've filmed. And she kind of relaxed, but what I was really looking for was, I was looking at her feet, and her feet were tapping like a drum, like really hitting like a snare drum. Bang, 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 bang. And she was super nervous. And then when the penguin came up on screen, the tapping slowed, it started to slow, and her fingers started to be still and splay out. And then 360 video whirs up, and the penguins start to move towards her. And I remember looking up from her feet, stopped moving completely. And I remember looking up to her headset, and her smile went from her mouth line all the way up and through the goggles, and it changed, like her entire body changed its disposition. And not only could you see that, but I think it's the first time her mother has seen that in a long time. And I wasn't, it's like you're getting such an incredible energy from the mother and this relief, this sense of relief, because for 59 seconds, her daughter is not this sick child in a hospital looking at these walls. And then also for her, she has this amazing experience to forget all the things that people do. And we worked a lot with the Starlight Room, and one of the big things that they push for all the people that are in the Starlight Room is they only want to know two things: your name and what do you want to do. Not how long you've been in the hospital, not what treatment you're into, not what prognosis, not what all the cords are. Like, what's your name? What are we going to do? And we really ran with that same idea. There was no judgment. You come into the room, everyone came on their own different levels, their different level of excitement about the virtual reality. Some were very apprehensive, some were just literally talking about it for hours before we got there to everyone that would listen, and then ran into the room, grabbed the goggles, and even when it was still completely black and shut off, were in wonder. But I think that format from the Starlight Room was really, really powerful for us to enter into this space and to create an environment that was inclusive and enriching.
Yeah, one of my, two moments with the VR that I think really stand out for me. There's this young man, about 5 years old, and, the way the goggles work is you put them on and you have to hit a button in order for the video to actually start. But even if the video doesn't start, you can still look around. You can see that first image in still form. And this kid got so excited just by putting the goggles on and seeing a still image, a 360 image, but still of a penguin, that I couldn't get him to turn the video on because he was so excited about what he was seeing. He was gasping, he was swinging at it, he was laughing. And he went at it for 10 minutes before I could actually get the video started. And that sort of joy, that joy fulfilled, is exactly what I think we were going for. And the other super powerful moment that, Jimmy, I think you and I both saw was there was a patient, a young child, who had clearly gone through some chemo recently and had some hair loss, and there was some scarring in a way that, we would all perhaps feel a bit self-conscious about. So the child was wearing a hat, and in order to get the goggles on, you either have to take the hat off or at least turn it backwards. And there was some hesitation there, but the hat was like a mechanism of safety for the kid, something to sort of hide under and be obscured by. So it took a moment to get them to accept the goggles at first and accept the engagement with the virtual reality. But once they did, they watched every video that we had on there, which is 7. So that's 7 different videos that they watched over and over and over again. And I was sitting with them one-on-one, just talking them through what they were seeing. And after, 15 minutes or so, the child got up and walked across the room without their hat on. And to see that moment of separation from the anxiety and the self-consciousness and the need for a comfort item to entirely be discarded and to walk across the room feeling like yourself, feeling like you just experienced something, I think that had a profound effect. And then I, grabbed the hat and walked it back over to them. And when they turned and saw it in my hand, there wasn't sort of any sort of a freak out or negative reaction. It was like, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot that. Thank you. So that's a change. That's a mental change, which really blew me away.
Yeah, I think it was a whole lot more powerful than any of us had expected.
So another piece that we brought, another vision of Antarctica, was a design, a gestural interface that our information designer, Sky Moray, did, called Antarctica: A Chromatic Paradox, which I will let her describe more in detail.
In this day and age, right, visual literacy is increasing daily, and yet most knowledge about nature is communicated through scientific journals, through publications, through books. And so we need people, we kind of are obligated as people who have backgrounds in marine science. I've sailed 100,000 kilometers around the globe, to be able to, learn design, think about at least what does engagement mean to me in my field, and be able to translate it across boundaries to maybe somebody else you sit next to on a plane who's never been to Antarctica, never kind of sailed in the open ocean, doesn't know anything about it. And I'm excited about doing that mostly through data visualization, information design. So with Antarctica Chromatic Paradox, we created this gestural interface where you're moving your hand literally over this infrared sensor that is mapping your hand movement to a screen. And as you move your hand over these different color bars that represent photographs, you actually see the photograph. And so you're able to explore under the surface. You raise your hand, you literally go above the sea surface. And so this challenges our assumptions of a gray, white, blue, kind of icy Antarctica. And it reveals this surprising realm below, one that is full of these rainbow-colored creatures that really highlights the biodiversity of that ecosystem and shows off the vulnerability of, when we think of Antarctica, we think of kind of a very few number of species. Yes, there are glaciers that are important, but really in this very quickly warming location on the planet, all of these creatures are at risk, and kind of it allows you as a kind of participant to wave your hand literally magically over a sensor and see these different color bars, these pixel bars associated with a photograph of, a limpet, a sea star, a giant leopard seal. And so it's this colorful thing that you want to interact with, and once you know that I can see what these different colors are and see what the pictures are, and it's from Antarctica, and I don't know anything about Antarctica, and that's cool. And look at that leopard seal on that boat, and that, it's very exciting. And so you can also make the pictures bigger and smaller. Kids get into that, and I think the spectacle aspect, the magic aspect of just this silly sensor is.
It makes you feel like a wizard.
Makes you feel like a wizard.
The power in Sky's pieces, it was the perfect segue into everything else we were doing. When people were walking in, many of the children that were really sick, again with the virtual reality goggles, and they can look like their medical equipment, were apprehensive about doing it. And so that ability to interact with some art and then to drive that underwater experience and to be able to use their hand to move through the images, that movement caught their eye, and that was the thing that started to engage them. And once they had confidence in that and they built up to that, then everything else, the conversations with all of us and the questions and answers about what we did and how we got to where we were, and then the virtual reality, that all came off the foundation that Sky's piece created.
Yeah, you really feel like a wizard, just sort of gesturing in thin air and expanding and contracting and stopping images. It's a really innovative way to connect people.
Well, it's also, from an educational standpoint, instead of someone standing in front of a room and telling you that you need to memorize this or prepare for this test, you are giving them a chance to explore. Yes, you set the parameters and you do so with data visualization and some artistic flair, but once they engage with it, it's up to them to figure it out. And Sky did a great job of showing them the behind the scenes stuff too, like how the technology worked. And I think for many, that was equally as fascinating.
Yeah, we also had lots of students that didn't interact with the technology at all. And for many different reasons. One of them was that, whatever procedure they had just had, they physically couldn't use the goggles because they had, still bandaging, or they had wounds healing, or they had particular disorders where they couldn't look at screens. So what we did, and it was a bit of fly by the seat of our pants to work out how we could still engage them and make them part of it, and not like they're missing out. The last thing you want to do is, not only are you sick in this hospital, but you also can't do this thing because you're sick in this hospital. And so we dug around the box of tricks, and we had enough camera gear to make us 3 documentaries. And we had this old school Polaroid camera that didn't have a SD card in it. And so we went and talked to this girl that couldn't look at the screens and said, look, you can be the photographer for this whole experience. But none of these images are going to last on any memory card. So once you take the image, it's going to print them, because she'd never seen what a Polaroid was before. They're going to print, and no one's going to have an electronic copy of them ever. So the moment you capture is only for that photo, and that's it. And she's not having to look through a screen, and she's framing all these ideas, and she gets to be part of the virtual reality experience and create these amazing images that everyone will have forever but can never replicate. And so I think while the technology was incredible and virtual reality, transported them to Antarctica, I think really what was special was our ability to be very, very flexible in space and be incredibly inclusive. And I think that was mostly because of our personalities. We have such diverse backgrounds and such diverse ways of connecting with people that we really could make an inclusive environment for anyone that walked through the door.
Well, I first met the ocean on the west coast of Cornwall, where I spent my formative years growing up, and I spent my childhood summers in the rock pools on the beaches and fell in love with the ocean that way, playing in the waves, disappearing all day. My parents didn't seem to worry about where my sister and I were, and we turned all the rocks and the pools into magical places, and we had this whole story going of which rock pool was the living room, the bathroom, the kitchen, and we had this whole playhouse with all the sea anemones and all the little creatures that lived in the water. They all became part of our fantasy story, and we played this game over years, the whole of our childhood. Summers were spent in these rock pools, and we returned to them year after year and remembered where everything was. And yeah, it was just magical, and we both had an affinity with the ocean ever since. We both now dive, and yeah, I think I still miss those childhood days on the Atlantic coast in Cornwall.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Fisher, and normally this is the part where I would go right into the podcast credits. But before I do, there are two things you need to know. The first is that Meet the Ocean has just made the list of the top 10 oceanography podcasts on the planet. The second is that 3-week international education tours take a lot of time and effort. So when we say thank you to the people involved, we mean it. This episode of Meet the Ocean was produced by Paul North and Andrew Gettings. Thanks to Dr. Jimmy White, Sky Murray, and Eric Wehrmeister for bringing their talents to the schools and children's hospitals of Australia. And special thanks to Camera Pro in Brisbane for their Explorers grant that helped make our education tour possible. Meet the Ocean is a listener-supported podcast and nonprofit. We create conservation-focused media and interactive educational experiences for audiences of all ages. But to continue to do so, we need your support. To find more educational content and ways to donate, check out our website, meettheocean.org. Thank you for listening.